Hi, everyone. I have a script, so let me get to it. Thank you for coming to this presentation about Stencil.wiki. Wow, I'm like already off script. I like wrote this all down and immediately jettisoned it. This is going to be very informal. I first would like to know, is anyone here familiar already with Stencil.wiki, or is this a brand new concept? Is there anybody unfamiliar? That's probably the better way to describe it. Okay, cool. I wanted to know like how deep to go into Stencil. But Stencil is a project that I initiated about 11 years ago at this point. No, 12 years ago. And it started as a exercise in loneliness, I guess. I was a riso printer that learned about it through just like friends of friends, mostly in Europe. I had nobody that I knew locally in the States that were printing at the time. There certainly were other riso printers, I just didn't know them yet. And that was kind of the purpose of the project. It started as the Atlas of Modern Risography on my own website, just like as a part of my website. Wow, on my script I introduced myself. So I've jumped ahead already. Let me quick introduce myself and the panelists, and then I'll jump back into this. My name is George. I run Issue Press in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is primarily a publishing practice, but also a riso print shop. But my main focus is publishing and design and printing, and I just really fell in love with these machines about a decade and a half ago, and I have dedicated a weird nightlife to thinking about them and preserving them and fixing them and operating them. So that was kind of the environment in which this came out of. I'd love to introduce the rest of my co-panelists, though. I'm sorry, and this I'm gonna just read because they're like bios, and I don't wanna get anything wrong. So first, Kathleen Sleboda, who's the co-founder of Drawdown Books, a publisher and design resource rooted in independent print culture. She is Ingnaakapamak, a member of the Coldwater First Nation, and brings a deep commitment to preservation and access through her background as a trained librarian and professional archivist. Before starting Drawdown, she worked in archives and special collections, experiences that continue to shape her approach to publishing, research, and community memory. The fair section of Stencil, which is kind of the main thing we'll be talking about, exists because of a request by Kathleen, and Kathleen has been the primary contributor to that for the entire existence of that database. So that's why I asked Kathleen to talk about why the fair section in particular is important to our sort of collective memory of art book fairs. Robert Baxter is an independent risograph mechanic and educator with really deep technical knowledge of riso machines and a real commitment to keeping them running, particularly in community spaces. So Robert has many years of experience now repairing, maintaining, and teaching other people how to repair and maintain their machines, and has become, I think, in North America, one of the key central resources for keeping these machines alive. Robert has also become essentially a co-developer on the new version of Stencil.wiki, which we'll talk about eventually. So I wanted to have Robert here to talk about the sort of technical elements of Stencil.wiki and the work that we've been doing together on the new one. My name is George, like I said. So Stencil.wiki is a side project. I let it fall asleep. Cool. How do I go away? Okay, I'm gonna just periodically move this mouse or the trackpad. So Stencil, like I said, is like a side project to the publishing practice. An Atlas of Modern Risography is something that I started just as a page on my website, issue.press. And it came out of like not knowing any other riso people and being very hungry for like a community of people who are operating these machines. And it occurred to me one day that like I'm never gonna have a community if I don't know who else is out there. So it became sort of an independent research project of like who is using riso. And it wasn't it was a little creepy because I was not necessarily contacting people, but I was just like building this public index of people out there. But from the beginning, on my own website, I set it up as a wiki where someone could add themselves to the map. And then eventually, after about like the first 100 or so, I was no longer the person adding. And the map was starting to be a kind of talk of discussion. There were kind of communities being formed because you know, a lot of people already knew about each other, but then learned about more people through the map. And eventually it came to the attention of the Jan van Eyck Institute, or Academy rather, in Maastricht in the Netherlands, who were about to start the Magical Riso, which was a biannual conference. It took many forms, but its main structure was as a biannual conference about riso printing. And so for the very first one in 2014, I was invited to talk about Issue Press, but I was only a couple years into printing and publishing at that point, and I was really nervous about talking about my own work, so I invented a new project to talk about instead, and that's where the larger Stencil.wiki came from. The map was still the original basis of the project, but I wanted to expand it to include technical information about every machine I could find out about, technical information about all the colors. Riso, the corporation, never generated a useful color chart for anything other than selling specific colors, but it's not useful information for knowledge about working with it. So basically they made a catalog of the colors that they provided, but no additional information beyond that. They were better at that actually earlier on in the 90s. There was one that at least had Pantone approximations, but their like online website was just like a picture of a panda that was pink for pink. So it was like no information about it that would be useful for artists. So along with the map, let's see if I can browse around a little bit. Made this really intense color chart, like every technical information I could find or invent about Riso at the time. So a lot of these came from like a graphic match to a Pantone swatch and then turning those Pantone swatches into all of the other technical information. So they're all like largely as good as how good my eyes are, but this is also all a wiki so that anybody can update that and change this information. Along with this is probably the most used page. I get a lot of hits from the neighborhood in Japan that Riso Corporation is based on. I don't know what that means, but this page seems to be referenced the most, so we can talk about that a little bit later. There's also profiles about every machine. I'll just pick mine as an example. We made like me. I don't know why I said. Just made like a little profile page for every machine that exists. And then there are also maps so you can see like who else in the world is using the same machine as you are. And that was really the real function of this. So it was meant to be a resource for printers to find other printers using the same equipment so that they can share knowledge directly with each other, but also you can search every color by where it's used. So if you were working on a project as an artist and you really need white ink on black paper, you can find all of the print shops in the world that use white ink. So it's meant to be a resource both internally for the community, but also for people to locate printers that match the requirements of a project. So that's the real brief overview of what Stencil is. It's built on is built by me really quickly and a long time ago, and the internet has changed quite a bit since then. And right now, Robert and I are in the process of correcting a mistake I made back then, which is to not use actual wiki software for, I just sort of hammered a wiki into Drupal, which is an open source content management system. We are now working on this new version, which is at new.stencil.wiki. It's public, available to use. Feel free to check it out and log in. But it's using MediaWiki, which is the same software that Wikipedia uses. So my hope is that by using actual Wikipedia software, including the system that one of the largest websites in the world uses, it'll be more accessible for people to edit and take ownership of different sections. Yeah, so like I said, Kathleen, very early on in the project, if Stencil, honestly, I think it was in the same year. I think in 2014 when I launched Stencil, I think you asked about adding a fairs calendar, like pretty much right away. And I was like, oh, that is a great idea. So I can show you what the original fairs tab looked like, if the internet's still working. So it's just like a literal list of every fair that's basically happened since 2014. Recently, I migrated all of this information to the new one and found that there have been over 700 fairs listed in that time. So when we were rethinking about the new Stencil and thinking about like what is the role of everything that's on the site, it became really clear to me that it could be used for more of a, like right now it's just like a list, but using the power of building pages in a wiki-like format, we can start using it for real documentation of these types of events. So, and we already have essentially what in Wikipedia land they call stub articles, the basis for a much bigger article for 700 fairs. So we just need people to fill in the missing details, and we have a living archive of this type of independent fair culture around the world over a decade at this point. So thank you for that idea, Kathleen. So we've been reworking the events, and is there anything you wanted me to say, Robert, specifically? No, okay. The new one, there's a little bit, it can be a little bit slow. That's something that we're working on. It's still deeply in development, but it is being publicly edited, so it's open, the development process is open to the world. So this is the new version of basically that same thing with also a better map. And then you can look at the events category page to see just hundreds and hundreds of past events. And so the plan is to consolidate all of these into, so like there'll be an LA Art Book Fair page, and then that page has like every instance of LA Art Book Fair. And we're working on ways to tie them into the map so that we can say that like Caroline from Pegacorn Press was at this fair and that fair, and start building a sort of like cultural history of like who was where and when and why. And some of my questions are about like what are the important things to document, so we can dig into that a little bit. And it's meant to be definitely a discussion with you guys, but also open to anyone. So if anyone ever has any questions, there'll be a question period, but I'm also obviously not very formal. So if anyone has any thoughts, feel free to yell them at me. Yeah. 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 I also think that there's going to be folks that want to document things after the fact. So maybe they don't add the initial thing, but want to add it to the public record of this fair existing. Yeah, definitely. That type of thing, to a degree, was always possible. But I'm really hoping with this new system that it becomes more apparent to people and easier to use. But thank you. That's a really good thought. So the main thing I wanted to talk about today was the fair section because we're at a fair, but I'm also open to talking about anything. Do you all feel like you have a good understanding of the project from this introduction? Okay, cool.
Well, George, I actually just had an idea based on Carolyn's thought and suggestion, is that there could be an invite to contribute link added to this so that people who know the organizers or past organizers of fair, because there's so much collective knowledge, so that way it doesn't all fall on George to reach out to all the organizers, but that people who are in contact or organizing fairs themselves, as so many people who are practitioners do, can kind of facilitate those connections. And maybe that can be added, Robert. I think that those ideas, so that we can spread the labor of the project more broadly, are really helpful. And because this is such a community that's widespread and oftentimes is working in these different nodes, sort of opening up ways to work along those different sort of nodes is really important.
Yeah. Well, that actually sounds like a pretty good transition right into the questions. So maybe I will just start with the questions I have, and we'll see where the conversation goes. But from a living archive standpoint, like what is the knowledge that is shared at fairs that isn't captured in not normal, but elsewhere? Like in like when you look at like the Printed Matter Art Book Fair's website, which is I think one of the probably the best like historicizing directory of things that have happened in the past. But are there things that are missing that could be added to a more open platform of documenting art book fair?
I would say that the sort of documentation that all the exhibitors do, in addition to the official documentation, could complement and supplement what's documented. Because, you know, Printed Matter does do a very good job of documenting, but they have only so many photographers they hire. And with over 350 exhibitors at each of these fairs, there's so many individual experiences that are happening that I think opening it up so that anybody who's participating and anybody who comes to the fair can also sort of share those experiences, because the focus has also been, I think, traditionally on the exhibitor experience, but the visitor experience, like those people who participate in this and who are equally as important to the way that fairs are structured and the way the community thrives, I think their experiences could also be highlighted in a way that isn't at present.
I think there's also a lot of follow-up that happens outside of the bounds of the fair that doesn't have a place to land. Like a lot of people are making publications in response to or as a result of programming that happens at fairs or conversations that were there. And because even in an extremely well-documented fair like a Printed Matter fair, because that exists outside of the bounds of the fair itself, it is no longer attached to that. And then there's like a bunch of like relationships like that between, like we've talked about, how do we relate like different presses to different fairs in terms of like who is organizing this? How does that organizing change hands? Like what is the like longevity, like history of how this fair has shifted over time? And I think that's something that even when it's well documented is difficult to navigate across that history. So.
Yeah, so the new system allows us to expand infinitely. So like having more information about the people behind the scenes, if they're willing or interested in having themselves documented in that way, I know not everyone is, I think would be very valuable. Because like right now we have every location a Printed Matter Art Book Fair has ever been, but that's such like a surface level bit of information. Like knowing more about the organizers and who've come in and out and how they've shaped it is, I think, a really valuable thing to collect. Which leads into this next, which is basically the same question, but what gaps in memory or documentation have you guys noticed in past events? Like there are so many events that don't have the documentation resources that a Printed Matter Book Fair does, so they just like happen and then that's it.
This is something I've talked a lot about and I've written about, is the ephemeral quality of fairs, because they are often self-organized, dependent on maybe one person or a small group of people, wavering institutional support, so they can pop up and be thriving for a year or two and then disappear. And then there's so many different scales, you know, art book fairs that happen within schools, within smaller regions, sometimes very, very tiny fairs that don't really have much sort of public or maybe online presence at all, but are super important to a local community. So I think part of the effort is really opening the doors to people so that as much as the larger international and national fairs are exhibited, these smaller efforts also have that ability to document and to honor the practice of the exhibitors who are participating and the artists and designers who are participating at that scale.
To add on to that too, particularly with these more ephemeral projects, they'll have a website purposely built, you know, for their fair, but then it no longer exists 5 years later, and that website goes away because someone didn't pay the hosting, or that why would you continue to pay for this thing? So having a sort of third-party documentation, I think, also helps in the preservation process.
Yes.
That's another kind of goal.
Because really this is getting into questions about digital preservation when most of the sort of documentation is online, and then there are, it's dependent also on third-party resources. One of the things I used to do a lot of advocacy with different artist groups and music groups and community groups, that you really need to take the methods of preservation into your own hands and not be dependent on outsiders or an institution to do anything. And so as much as printed matter is terrific, it's really the community self-organizing and the labor that we can distribute among each other to create a historical record and a cultural record that's accessible and that really can sort of amplify what goes on and make sure that this becomes part of the record, the cultural record of the 21st century.
Well, and we've seen that in elsewhere on the wiki in the list of places. Yeah. Like a lot of the, how many places are listed on
there? There are over 1,000 studios that have been added over the last 10 years.
So like when I was starting with Riso 5-ish years ago, I had a very broken machine. That's how I got into maintenance, is I just got a machine and it was fully not working. So one of the first things that I did was use the wiki to find everyone else that had the same model, and then just cold email everyone and say, do you guys know how this works or what it's supposed to do when it's working well? Because I don't. And that was really helpful. But 2 people responded of 12 that I reached out to, because a lot of studios didn't exist anymore. So the first task when we migrated everything over to the new wiki, that is just going to be an ongoing for a while task, is researching and updating all of those. And there are many studios for which the only evidence that they existed on the internet is a page on Stencil.wiki. And the site that they used to link to doesn't exist anymore, but we can see oh, here's a paragraph blurb about you, the inks you were printing with, the years you were active, things like that. So it's a nice record when the rest of those websites disappear.
And to that point, this is really with Robert's suggestion and guidance, that as we've been migrating, one of the problems, the kind of fatal flaws of a community resource project is that someone needs to maintain it. And I'm definitely not the best person to be doing that. So what happened with the map as it is now is that somebody would add their studio, and then a couple years later they would close. And when you're going through the trauma or whatever of closing the studio, the last thing you're thinking about is updating your Stencil.wiki listing to let the world know that you no longer exist in that way. So there's many studios that, somebody wrote me, they're trying to find a print shop in Montreal. There were 8 studios listed in Montreal. 6 of them no longer existed. 2 of them were no longer taking public projects, and then there was one that was active that I didn't even know about. So using Stencil to find a print shop or a collaborator in Montreal was a fruitless and frustrating experience. So the way that we are trying to manage that now is that we've imported everyone as, we've added statuses, so there's all these different statuses that a place can be. I don't want to get too deep into the non-fair parts of it, but I certainly can if people are interested. But you can, basically to appear on the map, you have to be listed as an active place, and everybody gets imported with unknown status. So we have to manually check and see if they still exist before they end up on the map. So at least we're starting with clean information. These atlas pages, I'm trying to think of one that has a good example. Well, yeah, okay, if we just look at the US as a whole, obviously there are about 400 studios in the US. We have 52 on the map currently active. But so we also can list them out as active places by city, but we can also show inactive or historic places. So for historical purposes, we still want to know that this studio existed in Milwaukee from this year to that year, but we want to make it very clear that they no longer exist. So we've added these little flags like, this place no longer active, but they're still around in some ways.
Mm-hmm. I can segue that into fairs a little bit in that I think some of the challenge in setting up the wiki is that it is for multiple uses. Like the archive is the bulk of the information, but it is a very specific use case. Where, like you said, the most visited page on the wiki right now is just the list of inks. Mm-hmm. So there is both like sort of active reference use and then past historical use, and making the wiki be able to do both is an interesting thing. So for the events right now, Something that we've been prioritizing as we figure out their structure is the list of upcoming events, because that's often used by people tracking like when they can apply to things like that. At the same time, we have to keep like the archive linked and working of all the past events and like slowly link those in so that we can do more with that history.
Definitely. Well, while we're talking about colors for a second, I want to use fluorescent yellow as an example of like using the power of Wikipedia basically to deep dive into a very niche topic. My goal is that every color has a page like this that has, on the old site, this little sidebar is basically all we had, as well as like a map of where you could go. But you can like dig into the material safety data sheets and find out for the most part what's in these inks and really make that information more publicly accessible. Fluorescent green, yellow, and red are not available in North America or in this Western Hemisphere in general, or wait, are they? Oh, it's okay. If you've got new info, I'd love to know. Like examples of these colors in use. Fluorescent yellow is blacklight reactive, so the normal status and also what it looks like under blacklight. So I really want to have every page have this level of detail, including the fairs, including the machines, including there is so much opportunity to leverage the power of this very vast system to a very niche topic, and I think that's so exciting about switching to this. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, the idea of like the wiki editathon is definitely very high on our radar, but the reaching out to fair organizers, not on my radar at all. So that's a great idea. Mm-hmm.
I just realized I was like, oh, when I add a fair, if there was like alert the fair that they have an entry on the, because I sort of have a lot of Google alerts set up, and as soon as I see a fair, I enter it. I feel compulsory. I want to share this information with people around the world. I want more people to be involved and to support the fairs. But I think, it could be integrated too, so that when you add things, there's a way that maybe the moderator is paying, but the person entering it can also alert the fair. So I think that might be a nice, I think the more that we can automate things and spread the labor of alerting, the easier it will be to maintain. There's a concept in archival science that says lots of copies keep stuff safe, and that's why books are so great, because lots of copies keeps information. We have books going back to the 15th century. The problem with digital media is oftentimes even though it's distributed, there's limited copies. I also think that lots of people working, the more that we can distribute the labor, will keep this project safe. And so I think that lots of copies, lots of people idea is really something that should sort of be keyed in and referenced as much as possible, because I think, we don't want everything to fall so much on George and Robert, but really create sort of a strategy for continuity, and for really a separated sort of stream of support.
Yeah, I mean, right now, if I miss a bill, the project goes away. So
Exactly. And that is true for so many fairs, too. If, like, a person steps away, or that link with the institution is severed and the funding disappears, that event disappears, and oftentimes the documentation falls apart. The ecosystem of knowledge is so fragile. So just creating more sort of more support structures so that we can make sure that you're supported and support each other, I think that, and building that into the framework of the site seems really important.
Just on that note, so I just discovered you guys this year, and first of all, thank you so much. It's so awesome, all the work you've done. I love all the hyper-technical stuff, by the way. Oh, hello. I love all the hyper-technical stuff, everything. But I was also wondering, because it is so much work, and you're talking about how to keep it going and how to update it, made me think about, like, do you have something where it's like we can donate to the cause so that could help get more resources? Just because, for example, I know, just as a person who visits and uses Stencil.wiki, I would be happy, to donate when I can, and like to keep it going, and maybe that could be a way of, like, maybe then hiring someone. I mean, I love this organic process of getting people to contribute, and the alerts. I think all of that sounds really good, but also just like coming to your community and people who really appreciate you guys' work, that could be another option.
I mean, this is currently the exclusive financial burden of George. I've put labor, we both put labor into it, but it's, you're the one footing the bill
Or call for
everything.
volunteers or something like that,
I think definitely all of that is on the table. In 2015, I made a fundraising edition that people could buy, and then that kind of funded the project for the next 4 or 5 years. From a just pure hosting standpoint, not a labor standpoint, but then I don't know, I have an idea that I would do something like that again, but probably having just sort of a mechanism of a non-taxable donate, or a non-tax exempt donation.
Yeah, just like a button
I'm just
that's
a guy.
just there.
But yeah, that's definitely a good idea. But the first thing that I would really love to leverage is the volunteer, the edit-a-thon, getting more people involved. That's the thing that I'm right now it's not an outrageous financial burden at this point, but as it grows, it definitely could become one. So I do have to figure out how to fund this in the future as the data, there are not so many images on the old one, and I purposely designed this one without any images in the UI to make it as light as possible, but I'm hoping that people are adding more stuff, and the images are where things get kind of expensive.
I can do a quick outline of how the wiki works. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
In terms of funding this kind of labor or just maintaining, it's like reaching out, like Internet Archive, other writing grants for preservation arts. I mean, the Europeans love those grants.
Yeah.
Somehow getting, Canoest involved, something where you can get that money in.
Actually, that international cooperation and tapping into the funding
Yeah.
that's available in internationally, since, with the cessation of most arts funding
Yeah.
here, I think that could be an opportunity.
I think so too.
Well, I think we're so used to thinking like, piecemeal, where we're like, okay, we do the edition and it holds that, but like, I mean, I know just from fair organizing, I was like, reach out to the institution and get their help and see what they can do, and like thinking like, even riso, I don't know, a little
Yeah.
side foundation, something, but like going beyond just the fundraising edition, which is helpful, but like bigger money.
Yeah, the fundraising
Yeah.
edition was.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's the key, right?
Yeah.
That you build it so you can work with institutional funding, but remain sort of viable without it. Like that I think is like a really important part of this.
I agree. The fundraising edition came in the sort of the same way that I like didn't feel comfortable describing myself to the conference. I was like, if I have something for sale, that feels. But now I'm at the point where like, yeah, I'll take anything. but 10 years ago,
Well, I think there's two pieces too. Part of it is about the visibility of Stencil.wiki and making sure that people know about it, that they're able to contribute it, as well as sustaining it. So something like the edition, that also raises visibility, even as and I think like sort of parsing through the different threads that will sustain this. Part of it is making sure that people know about it and have access to it as much as they're contributing to it.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
there's lots of ideas. I love all the ideas, but lots of labor too.
Using MediaWiki too also is not, it's strategic from a technical standpoint, but there's a benefit of there being a MediaWiki foundation that is also interested in supporting grassroots organizations that are using their software. I don't know that we're quite at the level of something that they would be interested in yet, but there are lots of opportunities here to grow into something that could be looked at favorably by MediaWiki itself. They have a very huge foundation that funds everything about their development. I think we're just opening the question.
Yeah, let's go questions.
I mean, I'm real loose, so this is great.
Just a random idea as I was listening. I feel like, you're talking about visibility and I had kind of like dig around, and I don't even know how I came about it, but maybe you already have this. I'm not sure. Is there a way to actually talk to people, like a forum or like a Discord type situation?
Yeah, there are two ways. So one thing that's great about the classic MediaWiki interaction is that they all come with talk pages. So discussions can happen on the talk page for any page. There's like a related page on all of them that is, let's go back to fluorescent yellow, for example. But there's also a Riso Discord that has a channel specifically for this. And if anyone's interested, feel free to get in touch with me.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I love that aspect of not just a place where you can find really deep knowledge, but also you can contact people, you can ask questions. Like I relate to what you're saying about emailing people and being like, hey, you have this machine, I have this machine, just sort of centralizing it, but also making it feel like alive. Like it's like a community, it's a place, it's not just like pages for reference, you know what I mean? So
I do like that in the Riso Discord, there is like a project page to discuss all of this. And George and I have shifted our conversation of building this from just like our direct messaging to that space. So there is like in that broader community a sense of that. I was just going to shout out that as far as I know on the internet, there's that Riso Discord. There's a second Discord that has just started up. There's 2 Facebook groups, which are quite terrible. And there's 2 subreddits, one of which is active. So it's a distributed community, but I like the idea
There's also
of like...
a French language Riso Discord too.
Oh, okay, cool. 3 Discords. So but I like the idea of in these community spaces where more live talking is happening, Stencil should like have some kind of presence in there to tie things together a bit.
Well, I wonder if all of these sorts of digital resources should live somewhere on Stencil too,
Yes,
so that you
definitely.
can find them, and that there's that two-way street. Because that's one of the beauties of the internet, is that we can link back and forth.
Definitely.
Because some of the discords are difficult to access unless you hear about them from someone else. And then the communities are so distributed, it can be difficult to access this information. So surfacing it through the website could be.
Yeah, I think that's
Great.
really important. the nice thing about Discord for the Riso community is that it's not that not everybody uses Discord, so there's definitely like gaps in use, but at this point, I'm not gonna take credit, but we're a much tighter community than say the average Wikipedia. The talk page, if you go to any Wikipedia article and look at the talk page, you are seeing incredible discussions, arguments, fights, agreements happening in this like very huge international anonymous space. So that's the function of the talk page, because it's a way to organize across a lot of people who don't necessarily know each other, whereas the Riso community is pretty tight. Like we, for the most part, can talk directly to each other. So the organization takes on like a different role, not role, but it looks different than it does on a more traditional MediaWiki.
I think there's a little bit more accountability because you meet people as you go to events or you're practicing, and it's much more likely, even if you don't meet the person, you'll meet somebody who knows the person, that the community aspect is a sort of supplement to the in-person sort of encounters that are facilitated by events like the fairs.
Definitely. Maybe I got a handful of more questions that we can try to get, because I think that the Q&A portion is just peppered in at this point. Please feel free to chime in. So, okay, some of these are like kind of not dumb, but like real basic. Like, why is this important to record the history of art book fairs and print events in particular? Like, why is that such a gap in knowledge to begin with, and how can that be corrected, and why is it important to do that?
So I have not organized an event like this, but I've like taken part in many book fairs, and lots of my friends are organizers. So my side of this is sort of speculative, but I will say that there's always that like conflict between like a time-based event and the record of the event, and like a lot of the zines and books and things that we publish in art spaces are documentations of time-based events, but often like we don't extend that to things like the fairs because they're kind of on that meta level of stuff. And those are always fascinating to find as someone who only got into this like 5 years ago. Finding good documentation of events that I did not get to go to but know that cool conversations were happening at is really important to me.
I think that's a great point, Robert. I think as somebody who was a trained historian and an archivist, thinking about the cultural record is really important. But there's a personal way, too, that by documenting practice, we build roadmaps and entry points for people in the future. And I think that's one of the things that I think about is that we're, like, even though this is focused maybe on documenting the past, we're really also kind of trying to create a situation that enables the future, like creating this lineage of activity. The biggest reason is if we don't care about it, nobody will. And I think that's true. And so many people are passionate about artist books. They're passionate about the work that's made and shared here, the sort of community spaces that are built around printed matter. I mean, they're really incredible. I mean, I think I'm passionate about making sure that there is a record of this because I want it to be known that artists gathered and made work in this way. Yeah, and I think, you know, there may not be like a huge body of scholarship about it now, but I'm aspirational that there will be. And so I want to support documentation for that future.
First point, none of these events were added retroactively. They're from when you started adding them. And now we have this record that was always looking forward, but is now 10 years old. And I think that's a really amazing thing that happened because of you just asked for it. So thank you.
And then did it.
And then did so then how could something like this be a resource for other like people who are organizing or future academics or like Stencil started as a way for me to learn about other printers. I wasn't really thinking about it in terms of scholarship 15 years ago, but now I really, because of the body of information that we've already collected, I can't help but think of it almost exclusively as a jumping off point for future scholarship. how can we be most useful for expanding your goal of there being more people working and thinking about these types of things? How can we inspire people to write about this culture?
I always think the best way to do something is to model it. Like if you think other people should be doing it, the first person to do it can be you. And oftentimes I teach and students will be like, why doesn't this exist? And I like to tell them, because you haven't made it yet. And so I think that's also, I'm really a believer in people doing it for themselves, DIY, doing things within what can be done. So I think that's really my answer here is like we begin to support people. I think at the table too, like when you interact with people who are interested in artists' books, sometimes they will say, I'm not an artist, I'm not a designer, but you can encourage them to interact if there are people who are interested in more sort of theoretical discussions, like invite them to participate in whatever way possible.
I think I would say a side technical thing, especially when working on the new wiki v the old wiki, is just like usability and hand-holding to actually do that editing work. Because like the whole point of the wiki is that kind of with just an email you can make an account and then you essentially have access to the whole bulk of it. You can edit wherever, all of those edits are logged, you can have conversation, like things can go back and forth. You can also edit the like larger structural things in the wiki. That's sort of the wiki philosophy, is that there's no distinction between like the web development and the content development. It's all the same process, which is extremely clunky. It's like you're just exclusively building a website using Microsoft Word as your only tool. So it's very weird, but from like a usability standpoint, I'm very into, like, it has to look a little dumb. It has to be a little clunky. If it's too polished, no one feels like they can touch it. So there have to be entry points and resources. So there's like, I mean, this is what we're building up behind the scenes that we haven't looked at, but like, there's guides of like, hey, you're adding your studio to this. Here's what you need to do in order to add that studio. And like, we need to create something like that for fairs as well. Of here's how you populate information for a fair. But then someone could, using exactly the same tools, edit that how-to page as well. That's where there's the no distinction thing.
I also think I'm interested in it as a resource for stealing ideas. This weekend, I can't stop talking about how Bergen does this book bath, where they're at the Bergen Art Book Fair, they do readings poolside, so the audience is in the pool. They're doing, they're all mostly books about water and various water themes, and it is one of my favorite book experiences, and more places should do. Norway doesn't own water. Everybody should do this. They have the fjord, so that does help, and a kind of a sauna culture. So there are book readings in the sauna, but like just there's so many great ideas out there that I think could be repurposed to other places. That I really would love this to be like a resource for stealing great ideas, for making better events and better programming and more not unique but like engaging book-related experiences. You've had this mic for a while.
I have a comment about. Okay. As far as you're talking a lot about archive and being able to find things in the future that are hard to locate, maybe because it's digital and it disappears. And one thought I had, because I've had this experience, is even like, critic write-ups or any kind of blurbs on websites also disappear often, like 8 or 10 years down the line. So is there a way to like have encourage people to maybe copy those as PDFs and upload them onto the site?
Yeah, there's the sort of, one of the more complicated things that we really don't have time to get into now is copyright, which is something that the wiki project runs against already quite a lot, because we're using a lot of proprietary information from riso. But I think that's all navigable stuff. And I would love to see this. This is designed to expand however the community needs it to expand. So if that includes creating records for actual scholarship around the things related to these topics, I'm all for that.
Well, and I think also there's the, like the wiki doesn't have to solve all the problems, and one of the nice things about wiki structure is that it's it's based on a citation model. I mean, that's the classic like citation needed Wikipedia thing, right? So being able to reference stuff that exists elsewhere. Then we run into the issue of when that is taken down from wherever else it exists, but other people have also solved that problem. So they're like, we can cite things that are recorded in like the Internet Archive onto the wiki. So I feel like it's starting to build out as people are starting to like do greater write-ups, like the fluorescent yellow page. People are building out different pages a little more. A lot of that citation is starting to appear, and that's really exciting.
Maybe because we've got 5 minutes, so my last question is, what does it mean to take responsibility for remembering all of this? Like, what can we do? That's my question. I don't know if that's a good question, but like, if we're all about DIY, how do we, everybody in this room, take responsibility for contributing to the record of our own culture? That's the question. I don't know if that's an answerable one.
Well, I think we make books. We make printed matter,
Okay.
and we participate. I mean, I really think that's how we support efforts like this. I really think it's sort of in the DNA of everyone who comes to these events and participates in these events, and it's just sort of a natural part of human existence to engage with one another. I think memory also, like storytelling, is incredibly important, and I think that's also why it's so nice to see the fair accounts being built out. To your point that there's all these unique sort of aspects of certain fairs. I heard of a fair in Portugal that had, or it was in Spain, that had a siesta in the afternoon. So everyone took a break in the middle of the day, was at the fair, and then all the exhibitors got to talk to one another and relax, and then went back and tabled again. So many interesting models. In the previous wiki, it was just a list. I feel like the new wiki that you're building can sort of encapsulate all of these sort of textures of experience. So really, I think the way we can all support this is by continuing to engage with each other, supporting things like this as users or as contributors, making work that draws attention to it, contributing funds if that's possible. I mean, there's many, many roles that we can wear, but I think just participate is the big one.
Yeah. I mean, that was really good. I feel like that's where we should end.
Yeah, I mean, we got 3 minutes, so we can talk. There are goals. So the fairs are obviously relevant, but ultimately it is a resource for stencil printing. So in the future expansion, once we kind of get all of the core aspects that existed on the previous Stencil.wiki completed, there are all sorts of plans to expand and grow, particularly around projects, like documentation of individual stencil printed projects. And there's room there to bring in, reviews of books. There are like all sorts of ways to, what's the end of my thought there? There are all sorts of ways to build like a much more complete archive of this, at this point, movement of a particular print style that has some scholarship, but not a lot. But I think that we can create this record ourselves and really show that we were here. That's a really clunky sentence that I didn't think out, but we got 2 minutes.
Yeah, I got a last one now. So there was a book by Press, who I haven't actually met in person, but I really like their writing on organizing. And it included some interviews with presses, and they asked 2 questions that I feel like we should be asking ourselves in this project. And those were, that I hadn't seen asked before. Those were, how does your project exist without you in it? And how do you see your project ending? And yeah, I don't want it to be too dependent on the few people who exist as editors on the project. So bringing other people in and building ways that other people can bring themselves in is, I think, sort of the big imperative in my mind right now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that requires, that's a lot on me to figure out. Because right now I have the keys to everything. And so how to transition into a more like publicly accountable model is, yeah, definitely a great thing to leave this conversation with.
I just want to thank everyone for coming to
Yeah,
today's talk
awesome.
too.
Thank you.
It was really nice to have a dialogue, and I think to have such an easy conversation with everyone where we could get so many generative ideas, I think even through the course of this sort of interaction.
Yeah, and come find us and have more talks, more conversations.
Oh yeah, so at D23, Drawdown Books has a new book called A Toolkit for Gathering, which is basically a guidebook for putting on events like book fairs and other sorts of gatherings as well. So come see me at D23.
Perfect.